Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Costing for Legal Cases. This session is hosted by Medical and Life Care Consulting Services, a Massachusetts-based case management and nurse consulting firm. We're so excited to have you join us for this presentation. My name is Amanda Barnett, and I will be the moderator for today's medical legal webinar. This session is expected to run for approximately 50 minutes, with an additional 10 minutes provided for questions and answers at the end. After the webinar, we will share the recording, presentation materials, and templates on our website under the webinar section. For this year's first medical legal session, Costing for Legal Cases, we're pleased to have two of our very own life care planners, April Pettingill and Cheryl Wunsch. Cheryl Wunsch has been a nurse for over 40 years. Her extensive background includes clinical nursing within neonatal intensive care, clinical research, revenue cycle management, utilization management, and care coordination case management. She spent decades working within utilization management and patient administration. In 2020, she began applying her extensive experience to the medical legal arena, working with plaintiff and defense attorneys to provide medical reviews and chronologies, case research, and consult on practice standards. April Pettingill has over 30 years of nursing experience that has included caring for the ill and injured across the continuum of life. She has a strong professional nursing background in catastrophic case management, including assessment of and coordination of care needs for severely injured persons, as well as hands-on nursing experience working with chronologically ill elderly, pediatric population, and acutely ill adults. April also has hands-on experience with patients with cancer, congestive heart failure, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, wounds, spinal cord injuries, stroke, brain injuries, and progressive neurological disorders such as ALS and MS, and pediatric high-tech needs. And with that, I will turn it over to April and Cheryl.
All right, so let me just share my screen here. Okay.
All right, thank you, Amanda. So we're going to talk about costing today. So our objectives for our webinar are: what is costing? Why should you care about costing? How is costing done? The methodology. Databases versus other forms of costing. Uses for costing in legal matters. Costing considerations and things to pay attention to. Next slide, please. So what is costing? So costing is taking a monetary value and applying it to healthcare services or products. So healthcare services and products are something that's medically necessary to prevent, diagnose, or treat an illness, injury, or disease. It's generally accepted standards of medical practice. So an example of that might be a physician office visit. A physician office visit, say if you had to visit your orthopedist, it might be to prevent or diagnose an injury or possibly a disease. It is generally accepted standards of medical practice to follow up. So follow up with care. So we would then apply a cost to that. Next slide, please. So why should you care about costing? Next slide, please. So costs address the medical damages for your legal case. Costing can be used for reserving, setting aside reserves for work-related cases such as a workers' comp case. Future medical care for any case where there's anticipated surgery, future care, or long-term, medical interventions. So an example of that might be future surgery, physical therapy, those types of things. Next slide. Go.
I'm sorry, did I go too far? Sorry.
Yeah, there you go. So if costing is not done correctly, it can be an issue for your case. Over or underestimating future needs and costs can place your expert in danger of being discredited. So it's one of those things. It's like they may not be believable, and so that would be discrediting to your expert. Costing must follow industry standards to meet Daubert or other legal precedents. So you follow a methodology or an industry standard. There can be legal ramifications if you don't follow a methodology, and a Daubert motion can be placed. Um, and April will speak more a little bit to the methodology, but a Daubert is a legal request to exclude an expert witness. And if that is not based on, if the expert's information is not based on a sound scientific principle, so your expert and your expert's report could be excluded, which would not be good for your case. Also, you would have a better understanding of the future care of your client, being knowledgeable about the expenses of your client that they may incur going forward. And also, it can explain the rationale for the damage portion of your case or the monies that you need to reserve back. So, a lot of times, clients think that their case is a little worth maybe more than maybe what it is. So sometimes having a knowledge of those expenses of your client going forward, it allows them to say, I think my case is worth $100 million, when in actuality, maybe the case is really only worth 500,000 based on those future expenses. So it's a reality check.
Thank you, Cheryl. That goes nicely into my segment, which is how we're going to talk about how costing is done. There are different ways to obtain costs, and we have to figure out which of those is going to be the most reliable. And it's important for reliability, again, to make sure that your case is stable and you have a good expert. So methodology is how you do costing, and you have to understand the industry standards, the challenges that occur within the industry, and how it is evolving. Within the life care planning industry, there have been what we call summits, where they get together, all the different certifications get together, and they talk about costing and what's the best way to do that. So those essentially become guidance for our industry. It is evolving as resources evolve. So what is methodology? It is the process for researching and determining the costs. As Cheryl mentioned, your costing has to stand up in court, so it has to be done scientifically. It has to be evidence-based, and it needs to be scientific. So we here at MLCC, we use the nursing process as part of our methodology. And I'll talk a little bit later about, actually, I think in the next slide, we're going to talk about the nursing process and why that methodology is evidence-based and reliable. Last and certainly not least, costs have to be reproducible. So wherever those costs come from, the resources need to be able to be reproduced by other experts or by opposing counsel. So as to basically check to make sure that your expert or your numbers are correct. So here we have the nursing process. As you can see from the slide, nursing process was developed by the American Nursing Association in 1958. It is scientifically based, it's evidence-based, it's peer-reviewed, it has been researched, and it's put into implementation, not only within life care planning and costing, but also in hospitals, in physician offices. It's basically used wherever a nurse practices, they'll use the nursing process. There are 5 steps within the process, and it's the implementation and the planning stage where the costing comes in. So planning is determining what the future care needs are, and then implementing is where the costs come in. So we have to be able to put costs to that care. So where do the costs come from? We're going to talk about basically 5 different types of costing resources. And the big one that has been surfacing, probably I would say in the last maybe 10 years or so, but recently become much more reliable, are databases. As I mentioned, the life care planning industry has gotten together with a group of multiple different types of certifications, and we've come up with some guidance statements, and it is evolving. And we need to remember that guidance statements are guidance. They're not hard and fast. Methodology and resources need to be consistent, and it needs to be reliable. So you'll see, as we go through the rest of the presentation, some examples, and we'll talk about what makes them reliable or unreliable, and why that is important for you to know. So why do resources matter? As you've heard us say, it has to be a reliable resource. You can't go to Bill and Ted's website and get a cost and say that's a reliable if that website is not a reliable website. You can't use Aunt Doris's, telling you, oh, I paid this much for my medication, as a reliable cost source. They have to be verifiable and reproducible. So that means that anybody who can pick up that plan can look at your resources, go to those resources, and check out those numbers. Resources have to be current. You can't use resources from many years ago and say that those costs are going to be appropriate for today. As we all know, healthcare costs are rising incredibly. And so what was the cost for a certain procedure last year may or may not be accurate this year. So we have to make sure that the numbers that we're finding are current. And we also need to look at the geography. We need to know where that care is going to be done, whether it's where the person lives or if they're going to be traveling to have it done. The cost should be presented in that area. As you can imagine, the cost, say, in New York City is different than it is in rural Louisiana. Also, the cost in California is going to be different than it is in Kansas. So you want to make sure that the resources and the costs are geographically appropriate. So these are the 5 basic resource types that we're going to talk about today. And as I mentioned, databases. And so what a database is, it's essentially, it's a national fee schedule. So originally they were developed for providers to kind of look and see what other people around the nation are charging for the services that they're doing. Originally, what would happen is the databases would come out with a fee, and then you had to apply a geographic adjustment to that. Recently, there have been development of databases where you put in a zip code or a geozip, and that would make that calculation for the researcher. And these databases are scientifically developed. They have their own methodology, which is proprietary to each different database. They collect different data points, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute when I show you an example of that. And they've been widely used, and they're accepted in both federal and most state courts, I believe. So, past medical bills, many people will use those as the basis for costing, and that may be appropriate if the charges were within the past year or so. But if you're looking at charges that are old, again, as I noted, those charges may not be appropriate. And again, we'll show you some examples of all these in the upcoming slides. When life care planning first started, if you were looking for cost, you picked up the phone and you called, providers in the area and said, how much do you charge for X, Y, and Z? There are still certain types of care that you need to do that with. And it's important, again, to obtain that cost in the area where the service or the goods are going to be purchased. Hospitals with the no surprise billing, they have to now make their charges public. So, and there's a couple of different ways that they do that. They either have a charge master that's available, or you can go on their website or call them and ask for an estimate. And again, I'll show you a couple of examples of that. And the internet. So again, with the internet, everybody uses it. We all, if you want to find out something, you Google it, you go on Bing, whatever web browser you use, and you ask it a question and it'll pop up an answer. We really need to be very, very cautious of that now with the advent of AI. While AI has its place, it still needs to be checked and double checked, because a lot of the information that comes up is drawn from old resources, and so it may or may not be appropriate. And again, we'll talk about that when I show you some resources going forward. Let's see. Okay. So here's an example of a database. Now, databases are created by a third party, so it's not something that we do. They literally get millions or billions of data points, and they run them through their statistical analysis. So in this particular example, you'll see the code and then the description, and then you have different percentiles. So you'll see UCR 50, UCR 75th, UCR 90. MFS is nothing that we pay attention to. And then you have RVUs, which are relative value units, which are used by Medicare. So in this particular case, this particular resource, you still need to do the geographic modifier adjustment. So the end of this resource, they have a modifier based upon where the person or where the care is going to be. So that's another multiplication that has to be done before you can come up with the actual cost. The percentiles are not percentage. So it's not like at 50%, it's going to be this. It includes that charge plus everything below it. And research has shown that the 75th to the 80th is most closely related to what we would think of as UCR. So we use the 75th or the 80th percentile, depending upon the database and how they break it out. So this is an example of a hospital charge master. So at the bottom, that looks like an Excel spreadsheet. You can download that and search. So you'll have the name of the procedure. This is a hospital code, which doesn't pertain really for this type of costing. Your CPT codes. And then this is what the charge is. This particular one also has another column, but I didn't keep the top line there, so I can't tell you exactly what that is. But this one is a discounted code. So you can't use that. Our methodology doesn't allow for us to use a discounted charge because there's a lot of things that go into that, whether it's the person's income level or whether there's insurance or not insurance. So we can't determine if that is going to be available to the person going forward. So we use the full charged amount. You'll see that again here, and this is from an estimate. So you go to the hospital website, they show you, do you want to get an estimate for your care? So you put in the CPT code or the name of the procedure that you're looking for, and it will bring up the something similar to this. Every hospital's web page looks a little different with this. But you'll see here in this first box where it says you pay $372. Well, this includes a discount right here, which is explained over in this part, but you can't include that because that $372 is not really the full charge. But if you look over in this other column, you'll see where there's a hospital fee, and then this is the radiology fee. And so they add those together to get $676. So that would be what we would use as the cost if we were using a hospital charge for our cost. Past medical bills is another resource that sometimes people use for costing. And you'll see here we've got 3 different examples of charges. This one is just for professional charges, and in this case, it's radiologist who read CT scans. But these were done in 2022. So these charges may not be accurate or appropriate. So we wouldn't use those. Over here in this example, it was done in 2023, so a little closer to today, but still, they have the CPT codes here, so you can see what they're charging for, what procedure they did. This is the diagnosis code, and then this is the charge. The problem with this, well, there's 2 problems with this. One is it's old, from 23, and the other is it doesn't tell us how many units of this service were provided. So we don't know what this $75 is based upon. Is it based upon 1 unit of each? Is it based on 3 units of one and 1 unit of another? We just don't know. So using this cost would not be appropriate. This example is right out of a billing, what we call HICFA or UB04, which are just forms that are submitted to insurance companies or to a payer. And here you can see that the date of service is 2025, which is great. This is the place of service, which, you have to look that up in your code book to know exactly where that was done. This is the CPT code, which is current procedural terminology, which is the AMA's way of identifying all of the procedures that are done. So that's your CPT code. These are modifiers. So you'd have to know what those modifiers stand for to be able to determine, is this an appropriate code? So this has numbers here, and it tells you how many units. So you could use this if you knew what the codes were and if that was something that you were looking for. This may be an appropriate cost to use. So we talked about internet searches, and when you're looking at what's available on the internet, we tend to do a lot of online shopping, and so that's not an unreasonable area to look for costs. But again, you want to make sure that the resource that you're using is reliable and well known. So this is a picture of a company called Rehab Mart. And it's like the Amazon for durable medical equipment. It's got so many things on it. It has practically anything you could potentially need at home to care for somebody, whether it's catheters or wound care or shower bench or that type of thing. So this would be an example of a good resource that you could use online. And you can search, you can see it says it's got like 18,581 products. So there's a lot of stuff on there. And they have, you can see that they're sponsored by some pretty well-known and, I would say reliable sources. So, Shriners and VA and so on. So that would be a good resource. Again, you wouldn't want to go to Bill and Ted's, oh, I've got this in my garage kind of place like eBay, I'd be very careful of, or Craigslist, or, Front Porch Forum, any of those types of things. You don't know what you're going to get, and those costs are probably not appropriate. Another service that you probably are going to maybe start with an internet search would be a home care agency. So what I tend to do is, look online who services the area for home care. But then what I would do is our fifth type of costing, and that is making phone calls. I would call that agency. First of all, make sure, do they service the area where this person's going to be? If they don't, you can't use that resource. And it might look like online that they do. So if you take someplace like, Metro Atlanta, that's a huge area, and there's, millions of people. So when you look online, it may look like, Home Instead goes there, but maybe they only do one part of the city and they don't do the other. So you've got to ferret that out before you use them as a resource. It's very important, again, to make sure that they are there I can tell you that I have seen cases where you tell the person did not make that phone call because either they didn't have the appropriate level of care, or they did not service the area where the care was going to be. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Cheryl.
Thank you, April. So we're going to talk about uses of costing in legal cases. So it can really vary on the case, depending on the complexity of the client. And an example that would be a pediatric case. What you need at age 3 and what you need at age 73 can be very different. And so as you're looking at the continuum of care for a client, some of those, you really look at those individually. Next slide, please. So uses of that. So future care costs for future care, future care costs and that long-term care over the continuum. Um, we all age a little differently, and but if you put a catastrophic illness or a catastrophic injury on top of aging, maybe I would need a walker at age 82, but because I've had a catastrophic injury, I may need that walker at 62. So it's something, that you really look at that long-term care or those future costs and how people need them. The other thing with the future costs is when we cost a plan or cost an item, we are doing it in today's dollars, not not that future. We're not looking at it from an economist standpoint and that present value. So we're costing everything in today's dollars. So it's just one of those little notes of pearls of wisdom, I guess. So another use is a specific procedure or follow-up care. So if somebody has injured their shoulder and they need shoulder surgery, there's other things that come with shoulder surgery. They're also going to need physical therapy, and they're going to need follow-up physician care and post-operative medication. So costing the procedure, but also costing that follow-up care is important. Setting aside reserves, again, that third party um, situation, such as an automobile case or workers' comp case, setting that money aside for future care. Medicare set aside, which is setting aside future care for Medicare beneficiaries. And then also a use for costing is in a retrospective way. So bill reviews for reasonable charges, looking at those charges that are coming through, and is that usual and customary and reasonable for that service? Is an office visit $3,000, and you're like, that seems a little high. So looking at that and comparing it, like April talked about, maybe to some databases or that kind of thing, comparing those charges to see what was a cost in that geographic area, what would be usual, customary, and reasonable. So that's another way to look at that. Next slide, please. So, costing and considerations and issues. There's some things to look at, to be on the lookout, some things to be on the lookout for. So, April has gone over several of these issues, but they just want to highlight those because they can really make a difference. So that costing resource not current. April talked about some of the bills that she showed you, 2022. If you're doing a report in 2025, you don't want to look at a 2021 cost to put into your plan. So, or using a database that maybe is not 2025, it may be 2023. So you want to look at those current resources. Costing resources that are not adjusted to the appropriate geographic area. So again, Costs in Boston, Massachusetts, a physician office visit is going to be a little bit more than Aiken, South Carolina. That's just the fact. So where the cost is where the person is actually receiving their care is important to cost it in that area using the old bills and cost resources for cost. Those, if they're over a year old, then they're not going to be beneficial. You wouldn't want to use those. Um, the resource is old and no longer exists. So the cost that someone has put in their plan for 2025, come to find out that that place is no longer in business as of 2023. So that would be an invalid cost. Um, Incorrect cost, the CPT. CPT codes change. As a matter of fact, October 1st, we had a CPT code change. New ones are added, old ones are removed. Um, and um, and even if you're using a current CPT code, you want to use the right one. So total knee replacement and a revision of a total knee replacement to different codes. The revision is a little bit it costs more. So there's a higher cost to that. So you want to make sure that you use the right code for what's happening to that client. Service provider not in the location where the case or the care is being provided. I love April's example for that home care. You and we do run into that with home care. You have to really make sure that they're providing care in that area and that the service provider is not 100 miles away. I don't know any nurse that's going to drive 100 miles to go do a visit. But and then there's calculation errors. Things happen. But looking at those calculation errors, did the physician recommend that they have a physician office visit every 5 years, but it's calculated for every 3 years. So, or vice versa. So those things are important to watch for. And some final tips and takeaways. Make sure that the person who's doing your costing is qualified. Do they have a billing certification? Do they have a coding certification? Are they a clinical person? Do they understand healthcare costs? That's very important. The review of the cost of resources and verify that they are appropriate. Are they still in business? And like April showed on the Rehab Mart, that internet resource, they when Shriners Hospitals put their seal of approval, that means something to people. Um, and if a cost doesn't look right, check the resource to ensure it's correct. That $3,000 physician office visit, is that really correct? So it just kind of begs having another look at that.
Great. Thank you so much, April and Cheryl, for sharing so much information and insight about costing for legal cases. At this time, we will shift over to our question and answer session. So you mentioned setting aside or reserving cases. What does that mean?
Um, okay, so um, when an adjuster is looking for to determine how much money to put aside for a case so that they can pay the medical bills, they might turn to somebody who understands costing, who can look at it's kind of like a medical cost projection where they would look at the person's injury and what they're going to need and then put some value to that. Now, if it's work related, they also have to have that extra knowledge of, is there a medical fee schedule that they have to look out for? If you're looking, say, like New York is a great example. They have treatment guidelines, so you have to also be aware of that. So costing can help an adjuster kind of put their case in line. You can also do the same thing with a Medicare set aside. So once you've got a person, a beneficiary who has been through a settlement, um, they have to, by federal law, put money aside for any care that Medicare would normally cover. So then that has to be carved out of the settlement. So costing people can help you with that, or life care planners, Medicare set aside consultants. They have to put that aside and understand how to cost that out.
Perfect. Thank you. And how would attorneys know if the costs are correct?
All right, I'll take that one too. All right. So basically, as Cheryl said, you need to hire people to look at those costs. You don't need to, but it's a good idea. If you don't have the resources in-house to look at those costs and determine, does it look right, or is that resource right? Something doesn't feel right here. A lot of times your opposing counsel will hire somebody to go through, your expert's plan and basically look at the costs and the care and so on and make a determination about that. So that would be my recommendation, is if you're looking to figure out if the costs or the plan looks right, is, hire someone to do that for you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, April. And thank you for joining our final medical legal webinar of 2025. A playback of this webinar will be available within 48 to 72 hours. For more information about our webinars and on-demand resources, please visit our website, medicalandlifecare.com, where you will find a wide range of medical legal resources. And with that, we will conclude today's webinar. Thank you again for watching, to our hosts, April and Cheryl, and we look forward to the next session. Thank you.